So when the 28-point peace plan broke, I was one of the commentators saying immediately, "There's no way that Zelensky can sign this. It's a terrible plan. It's tilted toward Russia, and so on and so forth." Because we're looking at it through like, what will Zelensky have to do? And by the way, it was brought to the United States through Kirill Dmitriev, and he is pushing this Russian plan that the Americans adopted as their own. Okay. But let's reverse the lens. Let's look at, can Putin even sign it? Now, I'm not just talking about the 28-point peace plan, but whatever this 19-point peace plan is, as they've gutted some of the sections. And let's look at this within the forces. Like we tend to think that Putin can do anything he wants. He can't. He can't mobilize because he doesn't want to disrupt the people enough that they might want to have a color revolution and overthrow him. So he can't just say, "I'm a dictator." He has to go through spending $2 billion to pretend that he has an election. He's bound by certain forces, and some of the forces are the more hardline mill blogger type crowd, the nationalists. And let's look at what they think of these kinds of peace plans through the lens of Igor Girkin. Igor Girkin, Strelkov, has just put out this thing. Let's look at who he is first. Igor Girkin, also known by the alias Igor Strelkov, is a Russian army veteran, former Federal Security Service FSB officer who played a key role in the Russian annexation of Crimea, and then in the Donbass War was an organizer of militant groups in the Donetsk People's Republic. In 2024, he was convicted on charges of exciting extremism. Earlier, he received a life sentence in absentia, like he wasn't there. He was absentia. He wasn't actually there, but he was charged by the Netherlands for his role in downing the Malaysian Airlines Flight 17. He played a big part in that, maybe even ordered it. Girkin admitted responsibility for sparking the Donbass War in eastern Ukraine when in April 2014, he led a group of armed Russian militants who seized Sloviansk. Girkin was dismissed from his position in August 2014 after 298 civilians were killed in the Malaysia Airlines Flight 17, shot down by Russian-backed militants. Dutch prosecutors charged Girkin with three others with mass murder. Girkin is a self-described Russian nationalist. These are the forces that I'm talking about, the nationalists, the hardliners, and they're pushing Putin one way, and like we think that Putin wants to go this way. Maybe he doesn't. Maybe there's more to the story. In April 2023, Girkin, alongside some fellow Russian nationalists, joined the Club of Angry Patriots, a hardline pro-war group. He began criticizing Vladimir Putin for incompetence, and on 21 July 2023, he was arrested by Russian authorities on charges of extremism. Girkin was convicted in January 2024 on inciting extremism, sentenced to 4 years in prison. In prison, he's been still tweeting and tweeting is the wrong word, on Telegram. That's his choice vessel to put out his thoughts. Okay, so I saw this, and then I followed that to the actual Telegram, and we're going to go through that to see just how nationalists, how hardliners are thinking, and what Putin may not have the flexibility to actually do. Okay, hardline Russian nationalists and war, this is Chris O putting this out, hardline Russian nationalists and war supporters have reacted with hostility to the Dmitriev-Witkoff peace proposals. Igor Strelkov's Girkin's detailed critique is of particular interest, as it's likely representative of this powerful faction's views. So, what did he have to say? Well, Girkin's comments provide an insight into the fine line that Putin is having to walk between reaching a settlement that he can accept and one that the hardliners will accept. Putin likely agrees with many of their objections, but knows that they are unachievable. So, let's look at the actual Telegram post. This is, as you can see, in Russian, so I don't speak Russian. We have to go to Google Translate. So here's a translation from Russian over to English. So he's writing to Dear Frol Vladimirovich, regarding the letter dated November 23rd, 2025, thank you for your information summary, as always. However, despite having studied it with great care, I'm in no hurry to respond to it. But the Trump's so-called 28 points, so-called 28 points, okay, the contents of, and by the way, it's not Trump's, it's Dmitriev's that's being carried in and just getting the blessing of Trump and going, sure, that's our plan. Okay, the contents of which were forwarded to me today. I'm aware that their number, after meetings with the Ukrainians and European partners, has already been reduced to 19. So we're talking about the 19-point plan. But I suspect that the thrown out were precisely those that were or should have been at least minimally beneficial to the Russian Federation. So he's not wrong about that. Ukraine's going to do its best to gut things that would be great for Russia, just like Russia was trying to put in things that would be great for Russia. If we can even talk about any benefit for Russia, if we can even talk about any benefit for Russia from this shameful document in which Kirill Dmitriev allegedly participated. Well, he did participate. Shameful document? Like, you would think that they'd be rejoicing, like, look at all the stuff that we have here. Okay. While the 19 points have not been yet been received, I will attempt a brief analysis of the 28 that were sent. So he hasn't seen all 19. It's still an open question about what's in them. Okay. They signify Russia's recognition of a limitation of its own sovereignty. Listen to this. Limitation of its own sovereignty. He doesn't want that kind of thing at all. With the transfer of part of this sovereignty to the supreme arbiter, protector, in the person of the United States. That's Trump. He doesn't want that at all. So the hardline nationalists are like, don't sign that kind of peace deal. What are you doing? That's no good. Okay. In other words, the United States will oversee the settlement process between both the so-called Ukraine. Again, remember, Ukraine's an artificial entity from the Russian mindset. It's made up. It's not actually, it's really Russians that are just traitors, so-called Ukraine, and the Russian Federation, and punish violators, something Moscow agrees in advance by signing this agreement. So he doesn't want the United States punishing violators, like, because that's what's going to happen here. The U.S. will be the arbitrator doing that. They represent Russia's de facto renunciation of part of its sovereign territory, de facto renunciation of part of its sovereign territory, the Kherson and Zaporizhia Oblasts, which incorporated into the Russian Federation according to the constitution within the borders of the corresponding oblasts of the former Ukraine. Okay, so first let's start with, it was part of Ukraine. They held a fraudulent election, put it into their constitution, and now they say it's theirs. Okay, so it's not theirs, but they're saying now that it is ours, we can't just give up this territory. What are we doing? Incorporated into the Russian Federation according to the constitution within the borders of the corresponding oblast, the former Ukraine. There is no legally justifiable way to return them. Yeah, so he's saying this, we can't do that. How can we concede anything? According to these conditions, our troops will not be able to occupy the territories allegedly abandoned by the Ukrainian armed forces. Okay, so when they withdraw from those parts of Zaporizhia and Kherson that they don't control, they won't be able to control them. It'll be like a buffer zone or something, which in real conditions means a unilateral concession by us. Listen to the way that he's thinking about this. A unilateral concession by us of strategically important bridgeheads in the Sumy, Kharkiv, and Dnipro regions, since no one is restricting the Ukrainian armed forces from returning them, including Vovchansk and Kupiansk. So he doesn't like this at all. And again, he's not abnormal. This is how the nationalists are thinking about it. They're giving the so-called Ukraine, and this is just perhaps the most important thing for the Kyiv regime, a breath, which they now apparently especially need, after which they, with the tacit or even rabid support of the EU, okay, so what do you mean by a breath? They're giving them a break. They're giving them a breather with the tacit support or even rabid support of the EU and the rest of the civilized world, civilized in quotes, have gained strength and properly prepared. A 600,000 strong army makes this easily possible, will once again begin military operations against Russia. So he's saying that the Ukrainians are going to start another war against Russia, but this time with Europe and possibly the United States ready to support them. So he doesn't want that. And then he goes on, they will lead to a sharp decline in the combat readiness of our own active army. Sharp decline in combat readiness. Look, our army, the Russian army, he's saying, is already it's humming along. Let's not lose this momentum, which we have achieved so far with such effort. In other words, during this short truce, He's calling it a short truce. He's not calling it a lasting peace, which I find interesting. The Ukrainian armed forces are almost guaranteed to be significantly strengthened, while our armed forces will be significantly weakened. In their main, currently, Trump card the number, organization, and training of assault infantry. Well, why would Ukraine's be strengthened and Russia's be weakened? Well, because Ukraine's going to use this time to rebuild. Somehow Russia can't do that at the same time. I don't quite follow the logic. Moscow's signing acceptance of this ultimatum, because that's what it sounds like, will mark the beginning of a strategic break with Beijing. Interesting. I hadn't put those kind of things together. I don't know why he thinks that's the case, but okay. This could have the most catastrophic consequences, the simplest and most realistic of which is a remarkable situation where China cuts off aid and support. So China is providing aid and support. The U.S. doesn't lift and hasn't had time, etc., its own sanctions. So we're cut off from China. The U.S. still doesn't lift its sanctions. Then Washington will be able to literally twist Russia under the rug, reducing it to the same kind of semi-powerless vassal that the so-called Ukraine currently is. Like, that's a very different way of seeing it than we in the West see this as, right? And incidentally, all perceived acquisitions will be casually confiscated in favor of the Ukrainians, leaving Russia, Moscow, powerless to do anything about it. This is what he perceives. It's remarkable. He says, he closes by saying, in general, I believe that no agreement based on the 28 points or 19 created on their basis will be concluded and the war will continue. But theoretically, there is no limit to our state wisdom. That means that they might do something stupid or foolish, and that's all. Okay, so he doesn't think that anything will be concluded, but listen, Putin doesn't, he's not all powerful. He might be more like the Wizard of Oz, the man behind the curtain, because there are these countervailing forces that are pushing him not to do this plan. It's not that he doesn't, I don't think Putin wants to sign the plan to begin with, but even if he did, there's the nationalists pulling him the other direction, tying him up, keeping him from being able to do this. Okay, my friends, that's my case. Tell me what you think about what you saw here. Is that true? Is this right? Tell me what you, in the comments below, what you understood from this video that you didn't understand before you clicked the button. And if you got some ahas and you're not subscribed, please consider subscribing. I do these every day. Thank you for your time, the likes, the shares, the subscribes, and thank you for being the kind of person who cares about Ukraine.